Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We continue with Republican strategist and CBS consultant Frank Luntz. Frank, you mentioned change, and that was the message that would bring Republicans together. Donald Trump has been talking about what he'll do in his first 100 days. He's been talking about draining the swamp in Washington. Is that what that's all about?
Well, it should have happened weeks or even months ago. I don't understand why he waited this long. And in fact, when you've got 70 million people watching the debates, that's when he should have released his plan for the first 100 days. What Republicans should look at, because there's going to be a lot of recrimination when this election is over, is that the focal point was not on those forgotten Americans that Donald Trump talked about a year ago as he began his candidacy. It's that it's all focused on him, his battles with the women, his battles with the media, his battles with just about everybody. If he had stayed the voice and the vision for those people who've been left behind, this race would be a lot different than it is right now.
You say recriminations. Do you think it's over? You think he's going to lose?
No, I don't think it's over, because if you look at the polling numbers across the country and in those key states, there are enough people that are still undecided. Hillary Clinton in almost every poll is below 50%. I don't think she's going to get a majority on Election Day, but it requires a level of discipline that the Trump campaign has not had. This is about the voice of the voters, not the voice of Donald Trump.
Is it the campaign or is it the candidate, you think, where the signal is getting lost?
I think it's both. And in the testing that we do, Donald Trump scores really well when he talks about changing the budget and holding people accountable. But he scores really badly when he starts attacking Hillary Clinton on personal terms, or even goes as far back as Bill Clinton. John, I have never seen a campaign that has less discipline, less focus, less of an effective vision at a time when more Americans are demanding a change in the way their government works. This should have been a slam dunk for the GOP.
All right, Frank Luntz, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we now go to Democratic strategist and CNN senior political consultant David Axelrod, who is also in Chicago. David, we must congratulate you first for the victory by the Cubs, and we wish them well next week in the World Series.
Only 71 years, John.
Yes. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, give us your sense of where this race stands right now.
Look, I don't know any consultant on either side, any strategist who privately believes that Donald Trump's going to win this election. I think Hillary Clinton is in a very strong position now, and you can see it with the fact that she's pressing into these normally Republican bastions. Your own poll in Texas was kind of shocking. She's got a lead in the aggregation of polls in Arizona. And she's doing well in virtually every battleground state, traditional battleground state. So the question now that you hear is, what impact will it have down the ballot? And that's where I think the focus is going to be for the last couple of weeks.
In those House and Senate races. Before we move on to those for a second, you've been in one of these. You know about early voting, the voting that's taking place right now. How does a campaign, if it's doing as well as the Clinton campaign appears to be doing, how do they really know it from looking at the early voting, and what can they do strategically in the next 16 days that we should be looking for as we watch this campaign?
Well, this is one of the places where they have an advantage because they have invested in the accoutrements of modern politics, in analytics, to really analyze where these votes are coming from, who's voting early. They've assigned scores in these battleground states to these voters to assess the likelihood that they'll be voting Democrat or Republican. And through those techniques, you can really get a sense of how you are doing. And they know who hasn't voted, who should be voting for them, and they'll be pressing those people. There's no comparable operation in the Trump campaign. The Republican Party has it, but the Republican Party has to make a decision as to whether they bring out voters for their Senate candidates and congressional candidates, notwithstanding where they think those voters are on Donald Trump.
Do you think the fact that Hillary Clinton is now talking about, she took on Senator Pat Toomey, the Republican in Pennsylvania, and is spending, as you say, more of her attention on trying to help Democrats get elected in Congress, is that something they can do because they're seeing the early vote come in? Or is it just simply they're looking at the national polls and thinking they have that freedom to move a little bit off of their attack directly at Donald Trump?
Well, I think you can assume that they've got pretty sophisticated polling in each of these battleground states. But I think there's a potential trap for the Democrats and for Hillary Clinton if she partisanizes her appeal in the final weeks too sharply, because the voters who are drifting from Republicans are Republicans, college-educated Republicans, independent voters who might lean Republican. If you partisanize the race too sharply, you may drive some of those voters back. So she has to be careful about how she makes her appeal in the final weeks, trying to get people out, trying to get people to vote, but talking more broadly about how she's going to bring the country together rather than turning it into a partisan fight.
You know, we've talked over the course of this election about the message at the center of the Clinton campaign. One of those hacked emails that came out this week is a conversation inside the Clinton campaign back in February. Joel Benenson, her pollster, who you know well, writes in one of those emails, do we have any sense from her meaning the candidate, what she believes or wants her core message to be? Is that still a challenge for her campaign, what that core message is?
Well, yeah, I think it is a challenge for them, but it's completely overridden by the things that Frank Luntz just talked about. Donald Trump has become the issue in this campaign. He has made himself that. He has made himself the center of discussion, and that has overwhelmed every other issue. So even though she's going into this election with historically high liabilities, in comparison to Donald Trump, she's doing quite well.
Oprah Winfrey tried to make the case for Hillary Clinton and said, you don't have to like her. I guess that fits on a bumper sticker, but that's not a, I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, I think that this is a binary choice. One of these people is going to be president of the United States. What people have concluded, and you see it in every poll, is that Hillary Clinton has the competence and that she has the temperament to be president. They have questions about Donald Trump on both those things, and that's what's making it impossible for him to make progress.
All right, David Axelrod from Chicago, thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be with you, John.
And we'll be right back with our politics panel.
This portion of Face the Nation is sponsored by BP.
For some analysis on the real-life moments in the debate and more, we're here with Wall Street Journal columnist and CBS News contributor Peggy Noonan. Jamelle Bouie is chief political correspondent for Slate Magazine and a CBS News political analyst. Jeffrey Goldberg is here, and we congratulate him on his new role at The Atlantic. He was just named editor-in-chief of the magazine. And Ed O'Keefe covers politics for The Washington Post. All right, we're going to kick our conversation off right out of Kate McKinnon there. We're going to run a clip of Hillary Clinton actually answering a question or not answering a question in the debate.
Well, everything I did as Secretary of State was in furtherance of our country's interests and our values. The State Department has said that. I think that's been proven. But I am happy. In fact, I'm thrilled to talk about the Clinton Foundation because it is a world-renowned charity, and I am so proud of the work that it does.
That was a question, Peggy, about allegations and proof in emails, both hacked and also found through Freedom of Information requests, of a closeness between the Clinton Foundation and the State Department. She was asked about that closeness and her pledge to make sure there was no appearance of closeness, and she went and just talked about the great things the foundation was doing, didn't answer the question at all. In politics, they say if you're explaining, you're losing. She decided just not to explain.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. You might say that was a bowing to the fact that she has no argument to make here that is going to really make you think, oh, there was no pay for play. Any of those allegations are wrong. I did think it took special, maybe gumption is the word to say, and we know I have only done the best work for America. After all, that is what my State Department said. That is like you tell me you did something wrong and I say, oh, no, I didn't. And I know I didn't because me said I didn't. Do you know what I mean? It was her State Department. So what can she do but pivot away from something that I think is a serious charge that even people in your focus group were talking about? It's just out there. Everybody knows what they think.
It's out there, Jamelle, but she seems to have come through the three debates in a much stronger position. So maybe she doesn't pay people don't penalize her for not answering a question, and Donald Trump helps her by taking the bait and going off and doing his own thing.
Right. I think part of the problem for Donald Trump in trying to capitalize on allegations of pay for play, or really any of the scandals and questions around Clinton, is that you can find something equivalent with Trump, right? So if Clinton could have pivoted by talking about the Clinton Foundation in a positive way, but she could have just as easily said, and she did at a certain point, that Trump also has a foundation, and at least our foundation actually helps people. His seems to just, purchase portraits for himself. And that dynamic exists for so many of the allegations against Clinton or the scandals against Clinton that she can just avoid the question by turning it back on Trump. And that has given her, I think, a real rhetorical advantage, even as voters still have a lot of questions about her honesty or trustworthiness, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. And when another time where she pivoted from a question asked to her about open borders, she then went back and said, these WikiLeaks emails are coming from the Russians, and the intelligence agencies have said the Russians are responsible for this. And Donald Trump called her out for pivoting and then answered the Russian question. Right. What did you make of, he sort of had the first half right, but the second half went to embrace Russia. What do you make, Jeffrey, of Donald Trump's, the safe space he creates for Russia when he talks about Russia and the fact that, the intelligence communities say Russia was involved in this hack, but Donald Trump is kinder to them than others.
Speaking of safe space, nothing triggers Donald Trump like a criticism of Vladimir Putin. It's quite remarkable to watch. We saw it the other night. This is historic, and it represents a seismic shift in the way American politicians talk about Russia and large authoritarian countries in general. I mean, it's not entirely explicable to me, but generally the pattern in American politics and American life is that we tend to side with small besieged democracies over authoritarian superpowers. Donald Trump's sympathies seem to lie in a completely different direction. Sometimes we do that well, sometimes we do that not well. Sometimes presidents are criticized for not doing enough. Ukraine and Obama is a perfect example, but this is not entirely explicable yet to me, but it's revolutionary.
Ed, what do you make of, we've had 3 debates. After the 3 of them, what's the final conclusion about?
His bottom fell out, and yet she did nothing to answer those questions about emails, about management of the State Department, about transparency, and she seems perfectly fine with that. And I think they have just gambled that they simply are headed by enough comfortably that that's something that can be dealt with perhaps when she's president, or she's going to have to demonstrate through her actions that she can win back the trust of the American people. But look, if she had faced, and if she faces a stronger Republican candidate 4 years from now, should she win, it's going to be very hard for her, because I think a lot of the other guys who were running were very well prepared to just prosecute her day after day after day, and it would have been a very different race. She got lucky this time, frankly.
Let's talk about the home stretch we're in here, Peggy. The debates are over. The finish line is within sight. In some states, they're already voting. Where do you see the race right now? Is it over? As some people are behaving like it's over. How do you feel?
I feel like surprises can happen, but I think we all agree that the trend lines suggest it will not work for Mr. Trump. You never know. And you got to keep an open mind, and we got 2 weeks here, but I think it looks rather difficult for him, and I think for the reasons that Frank Luntz really laid out. He has, at the end of the day, done a poor campaign. He has not talked enough about the perceived problems, the problems as they perceive them by the American people. He has talked much more and more obsessively and more engagedly about his own issues with women, with the rigged media, with the rigged this. Do you know what I mean? And it doesn't make a good impression or leave a good taste. It should have been bigger than that.
I mean, he goes to Gettysburg to deliver a policy speech, and the headlines that come out are complaining about the rigged election, talking about suing women who are accusing him falsely of it. This is the opposite of big, and people are left with that bad taste, and he's not been able ever to stop being Donald Trump in that sense, and that's the fatal flaw.
What's striking about this is clear from the beginning. It was, I think, if you observe Trump closely from 2015 or summer 2015 to the present, you would have predicted not this exact course of events, but something like it.
This is weirder than the exact course of events
This
you could
is a
have
little
predicted,
weirder.
yeah.
But the general fact that Trump has never been particularly interested in policy, has never been particularly interested in talking about anyone other than himself, has always premised his candidacy on the idea that he was a unique force that through himself could make everything better. And the limits of that are maybe much more apparent than we would have thought they were. But that's always been there in the Trump message and the Trump
But he's
appeal.
had more than a year to learn how to be a passable candidate. Not a really great one with a political gift, but an adequate one. And that hasn't happened. And I wasn't sure that would be so. I also have to disagree with you a little bit in that I think he has some political talent because he isolated important issues to the Republican base that electrified this political year and will have to be worked out by the Republican Party in the coming years.
I'm not saying he doesn't have any political talent. I'm just saying that he doesn't have any of the discipline that you would need to actually become president of the United States. I mean, even your like relatively inexperienced candidates like Eisenhower have 20 years of political experience in one way, shape, or another. Trump has none of this.
Except for writing checks, perhaps.
In our focus group, there's a lot of talk during the debate when Donald Trump wouldn't immediately embrace the idea of the election outcome.
Yeah.
In the focus group, we talked to people who were not necessarily Trump fans, and they thought this is not a big deal to me.
Yeah, I picked up on a lot of that too, walking away. I think everyone there who covers this kind of stuff saw it as a galling and really historic moment for a candidate to say that. But I am reminded over and over again in talking to Trump supporters and people that don't like Trump, that voters across this country, a lot of them don't take him seriously. They understand that a lot of this is, in their view, bluster and designed to just catch attention, which this obviously did. I think Ed, who was part of your focus group, said, I think ultimately he's going to come around and he's just teasing it out a little bit. That's what a lot of people I think have thought. I know there are others like Jeffrey who think it's astounding and it's horrifying. And I would agree it's unprecedented and really irresponsible probably of a presidential nominee to say it. But over and over again, I've had voters say this,
right,
that they just don't take it seriously.
Well, one other thing, Jeffrey, before I go to you, is that voters, also Trump supporters, have said, they want to blow up the system. They think the system has failed them.
Right.
So who cares if Donald Trump doesn't pay attention to the niceties of this system that fails me all the time? So I'm not that exercised.
No, I think this is an interesting debate about whether 70-year-old people can change anyway, and whether this particular 70-year-old person can change. But I thought one of the truest moments of this last phase was with a question, a very large question about the future of the Supreme Court. And Donald Trump could have gone anywhere with that question, and instead he pivoted to making the assertion that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of the justices, was mean to him. It all comes down, this is the essence of who he is. It's all about, there's nothing else but him in this. He relates to the Supreme Court through the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said something mean. And that was his answer, and there's nothing that lifts him beyond his base in that kind of answer.
Peggy, 70% in our poll of Republicans think this election's the only way Donald Trump is going to lose is if there's voter fraud.
Yeah.
What do you make of that statistic? They think the election's being stolen.
I think that most interestingly, they actually do think that if Trump loses, it will only be because of voter fraud. Look, the integrity of the ballot and of the voting booth, as we used to say, is extremely important. If we ever really lose it as a country, we'll be losing so much it'll be a dreadful trauma. There are certain issues to worry about. Hacking is one of them. Who might be behind a hacking of an American election? It's actually possible. So that's a problem. On top of that, look, America is a very great democracy with a long history of political mischief. So people sometimes do things that they shouldn't be doing. Have elections ever been stolen? My gosh, of course. But one of the things Republicans should be thinking about is that each state governs its own voting reality. Most of the battleground states are governed by Republican governors. Most polling places are looked over by both Republican and Democratic stewards who are making sure everything's okay. I think this rigged thing maybe is a larger metaphor in certain areas, I understand it, but if you're saying this election is going to be stolen, boy, you better put up the evidence and put it up now.
Right, and there's no evidence that there is evidence of fraud in life, but not that it's going to swing the entire election.
The most comprehensive study of at least in-person voter fraud that found that in the 1 billion ballots cast between 2000 and 2014, there were 31 suspected incidences of in-person voter fraud. I think it's really important to center the fact that so many Republican voters are receptive to the rigged message around the simple fact that for the past 15 years, mainstream normal Republican politicians have been arguing in support of very restrictive voter laws in places like North Carolina and Wisconsin, that there is persistent and regular voter fraud that does actually influence elections. And when you have Republican elites either argue this or never challenge it for 15 years, then you can't be shocked when the presidential candidate says things like the election's rigged, that people begin to believe it.
All right, Jamel, you have the last word there. Sorry, Peggy, we'll just hold that for when you have. Come with us next time. Thanks to all of you for being here, and we'll be back in a moment with a report from Iraq. Stay with us. We turn now to the Iraqi efforts to retake the city of Mosul from ISIS. The terror group has had control of the city for 2 years. The Iraqis are being assisted by American troops. There are approximately 5,000 in the region. And Defense Secretary Ash Carter visited the area this weekend to get a progress report. The fight for Mosul is expected to continue for weeks, if not months, and has already spread into neighboring cities. CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams is on the front lines of the offensive and filed this reporter's notebook for us.
Reporting from the front lines of the fight against ISIS is sometimes chaotic. We carried a GoPro camera with us on Friday as we witnessed a gunfight in the city of Kirkuk between ISIS militants and a local SWAT team. You can see our cameraman Abdi Kadani and producer Erin Lyle trying to capture the reality of this conflict without getting themselves hurt. The battle for Mosul pits America and its allies against a sadistic death cult. Airstrikes and helicopter gunships against suicide bombers. On the front line north of Mosul on Thursday, these Kurdish fighters spotted a small drone overhead, causing panic and drawing a hail of bullets. It's not surprising they're nervous. An ISIS drone loaded with explosives killed 2 Kurdish soldiers here earlier this month. The US military insists that its role here is only to advise and assist the Iraqis. But the line between advising and combat sometimes sees a fine distinction.
Members of the US military are operating in this area, although we're not allowed to film them. And we've also seen troops from the coalition, from a European country, firing on ISIS.
But even with America's help, this battle against barbaric extremists will come down to these men fighting for their land and control of their country.
That was CBS News correspondent Holly Williams, and we'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.